You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 401 of the podcast. And in this one, I chat with Nicholas, who has kindly agreed to share his story with us. And in particular, we talk about his early childhood experiences, substance use, worries about choking, suicidal themed OCD, peadophile themed OCD, going through exposure and response prevention therapy, group therapy, and much more. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. I really enjoyed chatting with Nicholas. Really interesting story, and I hope it helps and inspires many of you. And thank you to you guys, as always, for listening. I deeply appreciate it. We're 400 plus episodes in now, so thank you for being on the journey. Without further ado, here is Nicholas. Welcome to the podcast, Nicholas.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good
Thank
to have
you
you
very
on.
much.
No worries.
Yeah, it's good to be on. Yeah, I'm a long time listener for sure. Like I said, I feel like I'm in the presence of a celebrity.
Really bad one. I appreciate that, and thank you for listening. So, of course, I want to hear your story, and so do the listeners. So, in as little as much detail, it would be good to hear that now.
Yeah. So, like I said, I've been listening to the podcast for quite some time now. It's definitely a good. I've definitely been. It's been a good supplement to kind of keep me in a management mode with my OCD. Not to say that it's ever like, yeah. The one thing though is I never hear any Mexicans on here. I'm like, I know Mexicans have OCD, because this one does. So I figure I could just, definitely share my story and maybe help some other folk out there who can identify with certain aspects of you know what I mean? Like of
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
living my life. Yeah. But I mean, as a kid, I was a perfectly, well, yeah. So I'll start off. I'm from LA, born and raised, and Mexican American, typical upbringing. As far as like raised Catholic, um, three older brothers. I'm the youngest of four boys, so I got my ass kicked all the time. Um, and it was definitely a good childhood until it wasn't. I you know, Typical 80s story, divorce, single mom. Dad was a drug addict. Addiction runs in my family. So that's something that I have to be mindful of or now I am even more so because I realized, and I guess we'll talk about it later, how I was just kind of self-medicating my intrusive thoughts a lot. Um, and yeah, so, as a kid, aside from all of that, like, strife and all that stuff, being raised in the household, for the most part, it was like a loving environment within my brothers. They definitely were my sanctuary. We were kind of raised in a matriarchy where like the women ran the family. Um,
Mm.
so I was just like Dumbo surrounded by all these big old bossy elephants, you know? Um, yeah, so it was, but even as a kid, I was incredibly intelligent. I was in a program called GATE, which is called Gifted and Talented Education. So school and the likes just came really easy to me, especially math. Numbers were very therapeutic for me because, I was raised in an environment where things were uncertain. Was I going to have any Christmas presents this year? Was my dad going to be home? It was during the time of the the Gulf War, um, or maybe yeah, I mean, I guess that's what it was called in the early 90s. So I was always scared of being bombed overnight. I was a pretty scared kid. I mean, I
Mm.
high anxiety. I mean, I peed the bed till like I was way late in life. That's pretty much like a signal of like a kid going through shit. But I did the old mattress flip so no one would know. Until they started smelling, I'm sure.
Mm.
But yeah, so I was a highly anxious kid based off of just the household. And I kind of felt escape in just like school, like I said, therapy and numbers and stuff. So math was always really easy for me. And I think that when you're trying to grasp on any kind of certainty, you kind of take it where you can. So
Mm.
2 + 2 = 4, and that was fine for me. Um, and as far as like having early indications of an OCD child, I mean, my bandwidth was so consumed with just kind of living day to day that I just didn't really know what to look for. I don't think anyone did really. I don't think it was openly talked about as much back then. Um, but I do remember certain things like we would have, like anytime I would have homework, if for some reason, like let's say it was an 8.5 by 11 sheet with all these times tables on them, I would, if I, as soon as I made a mistake, I would throw it away and start over again. So it was this hyper perfectionist thing that I had. Um, Everything had to be perfect. And that's what my mom told me one time that she would fold my clothes as a kid. This is when I was like 4 or 5 or something. And then as soon as she'd leave the room, I would take them out and refold them the way I wanted them to be done.
Mm.
And that was kind of like how I was as a kid. It was very like a strong sense of like uh control, like this need for control because maybe, I don't know, the environment was pretty uncontrollable, you know?
Mm.
Um
Yeah.
and but a lot of, yeah, so typical, a lot of anxiety and stuff like that. In my teenage years, when I went through high school and middle school, typical puberty stuff, it wasn't anything that, for some reason, it just, maybe because I started dabbling in drugs, I would go to raves and like a lot of underground parties just to kind of
Mm.
escape. So maybe that was probably a reason why I didn't really quote unquote suffer so much because I was, you know, on ecstasy. But I wouldn't really recommend to a 15 or 16-year-old discovering themselves. But
Mm.
I mean, for the time being, I think it was just really cool because it took me out of the world of like this weird world of like uncertainty, you know?
Mm.
Obviously in hindsight, I know that uncertainty is such a huge theme as far as like OCD recovery, right?
Yeah.
Um, but at least like, when I was fucked up, it was at least a lot more fun, you know, versus
Mm.
like reality, which, can suck sometimes, especially when you're a teenager. But really, shit didn't start hitting the fan until I graduated college. So I, uh, I, I graduated college, in my late 20s. So as soon as like I said, school was really easy for me since I was a kid. So it kind of provided me the skeletal system that I needed because I had this octopus life of like just what was going to happen the next day. And so I kind of I guess I really used school as like my my vertebrae, like my backbone, right? And
Mm.
I didn't realize how dependent I was on it until I graduated. And then I was like, oh shit, like I don't have this anymore. I don't have this stability in my life. So I graduated in school in 2007 from college. And as soon as that happened, I just had crippling anxiety. Even more so when the anxiety I've never felt before. And I don't know if it was all backed up because like I was just in school mode, like hyper focus mode. as a kid, when someone would be like, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I was like, "I just want to be a grown up. So I get the fuck out of here."
Mm.
Because even as a kid, I realized like I have options. As a kid right now, I don't have options because I have to order from the 99-cent menu because my mom told me to. But I want the big hamburger. They cost like $5. So I just was like, I think that I was so hyper focused on that like maybe it just all was backlogged. And so I had the bandwidth this time to kind of experience all of this stuff about, growing up with like a drug addicted dad and like just all the crazy stuff. I think it just all kind of like hit me at once. And so I started seeing a therapist, as we all do, and typical like psychodynamic therapist. We went through a lot of things like, cognitive distortions, which you know, I'm sure everyone knows what those are at this point. And just really trying to rework my brain. Um, as far as like, just trying to maneuver through anxiety. Um, and I think I don't necessarily think I was diagnosed with anything. I think I had a pretty cool, like, LA, California type therapist, and I don't think he wanted to diagnose me for shit. But I think we just kind of said generalized anxiety just for the sake of a catch-all. I think that that's kind of what a lot of people kind of get like looped into. Like, oh, we don't know what it is. Let's just call it generalized anxiety and call it a day. Um, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure that's not what how it is, but
Yeah, it can
um,
happen.
yeah, yeah. I know. And listening to all your other guests, I'm like, oh my God, that happened to me too. Um, but the one thing that always like kind of ran true was my intrusive thoughts during this time. So they would be very, there was a, there was one time during this time, and mind you, I'm in my late 20s, I graduated, whatever. There was a time where I thought that I was going to die because my throat was going to close up. And I remember I'd have this thought in my head over and over and over again. And I remember sitting at a bar with my friend. She was a bartender, and she's like, um, she's like, what's going on? And I was like, I just have this thought in my head that I just can't shake. She'd already know what was going on about like the anxiety and stuff. She, what is it? And I was so shameful to admit it, but I was like, fuck, at this point, like, I'm at a bar. Like, if I'm going to offend you with my intrusive thoughts, then you probably shouldn't be a bartender. And so I was like, oh, I have this thought that like my throat's going to close up and I'm going to die. She goes, well, why would you have that thought if it's like, is there a reason to believe that? I'm like, no, but I just can't escape it. And I remember she said in their little voice, like, dude, that's the thing. You need to check that out. I'm like, what do you think I've been doing this whole time? Like, but it was just one of those things where like we just chalked it up to just anxiety because obviously having crippling anxiety and intrusive thoughts are um part of it, right?
Mm.
But I started doing random things like I would map out where all the urgent cares were at, and I would map out like where all of the 24-hour emergency rooms are at. I would sleep with my phone in my hand. Um, I would kind of I would avoid like eating apples like in a certain way. Like if it was because if I felt the sensation of a knot in my throat, like I eat really fast. And if I didn't chew the apple, like I would just be like, and
Mm.
I'm like, this is it. So in hindsight, I was engaging in a little bit of avoidance behavior. Um, but yeah, so I was hyper focused on, I guess, my health at that point, but just randomly like, oh yeah, my throat's gonna close up, I'm gonna die. And that I remember that lasted for like untreated properly, untreated, like it it it, it, it lasted for like half a year. I
Mm.
remember automatically one day I just was like, oh, I'm not gonna die today. My throat's not gonna close up. And so that kind of went away. And I was like, oh, okay, that was just a spin of my generalized anxiety. And I had gone through I mean, at this point, that was like a few years, so I was in my early 30s at this point, and I had some of my first really meaningful relationships. I identify as a gay man, so that's a whole slew of fucking shit that you have to deal with just how the world is, and um, being raised Catholic, and having that residual shame and guilt all the time for just being yourself. Not as much anymore, but as a kid that you could imagine.
Mm,
And really not having a template to go off of as far as like looking for love and really knowing what true love, like what a healthy version of love is. When you're growing up and you already feel like you're in this weird world with this crazy mind, and then all of a sudden you slap on this idea of, oh, I'm attracted to men, or you know what I mean? Like you're
mm,
just kind of like, well, shit. Like I just feel like I'm a weirdo.
mm,
And at that point, though, in my early 30s, I clearly was like, I'm just gay. That's fine. But but I remember at this point I had my healthy relationships, and so that really kind of helped. Like I don't know, it really kind of helped just me just trying to tap into that. But the breakups obviously really sucked because I didn't really have a lot of those growing up. So as an adult, having experienced that stuff, it really took a toll on me. I've always been an anxiety with a side of depression, um, but this time I felt like the depression was a little bit more of the main dish because I was going through a slump. So these new feelings of like dread and all that stuff that just weren't really going away, I ended up getting on Zoloft, and I was on it for like, because at that time I didn't really want to like take any pills. Um, I think it was probably just something that was ingrained in me growing up, for crazy people. Um, but at that point, I'm like, something's got to give. Like, I don't feel good. This fucking sucks. Obviously, me listening to you guys isn't really doing anything for me. It's my life, and I'm gonna do what I need to like get out of bed. So I did, and it helped a lot. And I was off and on them for a few years, just to as life was, 2008 hit, when I graduated. So that was like, it was a lot of like life-changing experiences. And I think when you have like, or when one experiences some sort of PTSD or complex PTSD, um, that's maybe not quite resolved or grasped, like any life event, you could get kicked into, in the gut. It could be their marriage, it could be a childbirth or birth, it could. But I noticed I do have friends that have crazy PTSD from their upbringing, and I always have to remind them, and it's actually therapy for me. Like it doesn't matter how good it's labeled, this event in your life. It's such a huge change that it's going to kick up dust. So you know what I mean? I have to remind myself that. Um, and and so and at this point, I'm like off and on, but at this time, I'm on Zola for the longest time. I'm on it for like maybe 1 or 2 years, and I was like, you know what, I'm good. I'm good. I'm in like an autopilot. I'm good. And at this point, I started a job as an art director. So I'm a graphic designer. All this time I've been graphic designing my way up to the top. And I'm like, oh, this is like the big boy job. This is like, I'm going to open up these venues. I'm going to run all the creative for Hollywood in these venues. And I work in an industry where we have a lot of nightclubs and restaurants. I work in hospitality. So it was like, oh yeah, this is gonna be great. Da, 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 da. Well, I had signed my contract for this job months in advance, which gave me the time to get off medication. So I was like, with the help of my psychiatrist and my therapist at the time, the one that I started seeing when I was in my late 20s, I was like, I'll take this time to get off of my meds because this is what I want. and I just want to go into this job with a clear mindset, or you know, and I don't know, that's what I was thinking. And so I did, and I did it over a course of a long time. I probably did it because I figure if I was on these for 2 years almost, I should probably at least take like 3 months to like go off of them. So I started going off of them, and it was a process. I wouldn't say that it was a little tricky, but I take fish oil every day. I've had taken fish oil for years. And so I think it really did help with like the brain zaps that people get sometimes when they get off of them. So little things like that, like I think like I was front loading with supplements that I've always taken. So I think that helped a little bit. But as soon as I got into this job, I was like smacked in the head with like, oh, you're in for it. And I didn't listen to my sensors, At this point, I realized I had gone through my crippling anxiety, and I kind of known like like when your brakes need to be changed, the little scraping noise happens.
Mm.
And I didn't listen to him this time. I was like, oh, fuck it. I'm not going to be a pussy. I'm going to actually do this shit. And so then I went for it, and I burned out quickly. And with that kicked up everything. It kicked up um almost like the crippling anxiety I thought I was over, the intrusive thoughts that went away, the depression that of the breakup, like all of these, like it was like an omelet of like the most shittiest feelings that I've ever experienced up to this day in my life. And it was fucking terrible. It was one of the darkest times in my life because I was so overwhelmed with emotions and feelings that I didn't know where to start to get out of it. At least in the past, I've had, oh, it was just anxiety, or oh, it was just depression, or oh, it was just this. Like now it's just everything. At the same time, I still had to produce, and I still was responsible for launching these venues and making sure that they went off without a hitch, because this was like my career depended on this in my head, I took on this job, and I was like, I gave them the best interviews, and I was,
Mm.
and they gave it to me, and I was like, yeah, I could do this, and it was really hard, and I just remember one time I I woke up, and I just was like, I can't go to work today. And I just remember driving to work, um and then I turned around and drove to my grandmother's house, who lived like an hour away. And I just walked in and just started crying because I didn't know what to do. She pretty much raised me. My mom was so busy working that I was like a grandma's boy. So I went there, and she really did like help me get into a point where I could start tackling what was going on. Um, and mind you, at this time, I mean, I hadn't slept for like 3 or 4 days. When I get insomnia, it's bad. Like it is like I hate it when people are like, oh my God, I had insomnia last night. I only got like 2 hours of sleep. I'm like, bitch, no, you still fucking slept. There's people out there who have not slept for 4 days.
Mm.
That's insomnia. There are people out there who are addicted to Ambien. That's insomnia. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
and that was me. It was like, so not only was I going through the fucking omelet of shit, I wasn't sleeping on top of it. So
Mm.
it was almost making it even worse. And I really thought that I was losing my mind. My mom, after my grandma took care of me, she kicked me off to my mom. And my mom's a typical Mexican mom, tough love, you know, you know what I mean? Like just that typical tough love Mexican mom. And she's just like trying to get me to sleep. She started, I got stoned with her. I took Tylenol PM, and I just was like, I am gonna lose it, lady. You're gonna kill your son. But we ended up getting taking me to urgent care and getting back on meds. And I ended up getting back on Zoloft. Thank God. Um, so that takes a while to kind of like kick back in. But I was so when I was before I went through all like when I was in that, it was a dark depression, a feeling that I'm not used to. Um, this impending doom constantly. Everything was just dark. Everything was heavy, and everything just was so heavy. And at that point, I realized like this is why people kill themselves because this is a lot, and it's paired with this fucking feeling of like it's never gonna end, you know? It's a lot, plus it's never gonna end. It's obviously your mind and the depression like lying to you, but when you're in it and you don't have the proper tools to navigate it, as I did not, I was like, oh, this is why people boop, boop. And so just me being in such close proximity to those that way of thinking at first time of my life, I was like, oh my God, do I want to kill myself? Do I want to, why am I thinking like this? So I almost started having this hyper obsession with suicide. And when I got on meds again, and I'm like, oh, this will go away. It didn't go away. And so when I started talking to the psychiatrist about my medication dose, I was like, listen, I'm having these thoughts of suicide. And she goes, well, do you have a plan? I was like, no, I don't have a plan, but I can't even go downtown in LA to do an errand because I keep on the high buildings make me think people like jumping, or I can't run over a bridge because I feel like this urge or like these thoughts of like jumping. And I started realizing that it was starting to turn into an obsession. And I was so scared of feeling depressed again that uh, I kind of I was doing things to avoid that fear of the suicide that I was experiencing, right? Like um and that's when I realized something was off. Like but then again, I didn't realize I've never been through a deep depressive situation like that before in my life. So I figure, oh, maybe this is just a residual, you know? Kept on going through life. Shit was not letting up, right? Like, then I found myself engaging in avoidance behavior. I work in Photoshop. I didn't want to use the slice tool because it reminded me of like that, and like I was trying to not feel that or experience that. And so I started engaging in avoidance behavior about these suicide themes. Like anytime someone asked me like, do you want to commit, I was like, no, I don't. Or if I would read it on Google, like, do I want to commit suicide? It wasn't like I wanted to, it was just this hyper focus of it, and this fear of it, to the point where I wouldn't run certain errands or go over certain streets. And I was like, this is not right. Like something's not right. And that's when I realized, like, because I was grasping like out of the depression, and I was like able to start thinking clearly, like, okay, what is going on here? And I'll never forget it. One time I was driving home, and what's the comedian's name? Maria Bamford. Is that
Yeah.
her name?
Yeah.
Is that I say that right?
You did. Yeah.
Maria Bamford? Yeah. I remember I was listening to a podcast of hers, and she was talking about these intrusive thoughts. I'm like, oh shit, that kind of sounds like me. And but I didn't even think of anything of it. A month later, still having these weird like thoughts of suicide, but not really like, you know. Um, I'm visiting my friend. Mind you, I'm still, even though I've taken the meds and I've been nursed back from like my grandma, like the elephants in my family, fucking kick me back into gear. I um I still was having this thing that I really didn't have any words or anything for it. And then all of a sudden I visit my friend, still high stress job, by the way. I'm still having to produce, you know. And so I remember I'm at my friend's house in the midst of deadlines, still fucking crazy, stressed out, but at least I can sleep, and at least the intrusive thoughts are not as overpowering, but they're just kind of in the back. And it's the same one, it's the suicide thing. I can't use the razor blade tool in Photoshop kind of thing. And I remember she's like changing her baby's diaper or something, and then I had an intrusive thought about the baby's diaper and like about the naked baby and all this stuff, and I was like, wait, why did I just have that thought? Am I a pedophile? And then without and like a snap, I remember I just felt this fear and dread overcome me, and then magically, I'm not scared of killing myself. I am scared that I'm a pedophile. So I was like, what the fuck is this? And I remember leaving her house and like turning the corner of my car and seeing the sight of children and being like, I saw the Grim Reaper. Like I seen like little razor blades. Like now the razor blades have become children. And it was like, what is going on with me? And at that time, that's when I realized, like, okay, something's going on that I'm not quite grasping. And like I said, I still didn't have like the the pathways as to what this is, but I started noticing patterns, like any good pedophile, I avoided children. I would only like run errands at night when there was no families around. I found myself not going to family functions where there's gonna be a lot of kids. Because like again, I'm I'm trying to avoid bridges. Like now I could drive over a bridge and go run errands in downtown LA, like no problem. But now it's like morphed and changed, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is nuts. And so, um, don't ask me how, but I remember that Maria Bamford interview, and I was like, what was she suffering from? And I was like, something about thoughts, and I looked it up, and I was like, OCD. And I'm like, well, I've been called that throughout my life, but I'm still thinking like it's washing hands and checking and things like that. And as I start doing research, healthy research, not like reassurance research, which I'm sure I was doing a lot of at the time, I discovered that, wait a minute, I could possibly have OCD and this thing they call pure OCD, where my checking the knob of the stove is actually in my head all day. And so after some research, I discovered the gatekeeper, Chrissy Hodges, and her crazy hairstyle, and she was so great. And I remember making a appointment with her, and I was explaining to her what was going on, and she's like, really cool about it. And she's like, I'm gonna direct you to some people that you could talk to, and this and that, and so if anything, she was really a pivotal stage in my proper recovery of OCD. Like she really, and I'm sure for a lot of people, she kind of makes you feel like you're not crazy. Um, and she makes you feel like, okay, you've been talking to this person, but why don't you let me just steer you in this direction and you can talk with them and give you the right resources. And ever since that happened, then like I started getting properly treated for this. And that's kind of been my journey ever since. It's been a fucking journey. It's a journey every day. But it's such a regular part of my life now that now it's just part of my job of my journey. It was it was like when I got the therapy and I started to do the work, I was like, this doesn't seem right. Like, why am I gonna go to a freaking playground by myself and watch these kids play? That's the last thing I want to do. But that was part of like the exposure, right? And so it was so hard because I work in an environment where it's like nightclubs, restaurants, bottle service. And so I'm having to do all these cool flyers. And then on my lunch break, I would go to the park next door and watch these kids play and like let all the thoughts come in and even add to them too. Really get me to the point where I'm just like nervous. And then I got to take that back to work. And after a while, I realized like maybe I should do my exposures like after work. So it was nuts. I don't know. I was a glutton for punishment, I guess. But I was just like, and it was interesting because I realized like because I've had a couple of theme switches, right? Through the course, like a little bit of health, the self-harm, pedophilia, all the good ones, all the fun ones. And then all of a sudden it was almost like like if my OCD was like a kidney stone in my head, and then like the OCD therapy like broke it. And then now I had all these little stones in my head. And so my brain is trying to latch on to like, it's like I'm like pissing out all of these little kidney stones, but they're all little theme switches. So then I realized like almost like the OCD was like the therapy was dragging the OCD out of the house by the hair, and my brain was doing everything to like hold on to it. So I realized that during that therapy, like during doing the therapy, like my themes were changing nonstop. Like I went back to suicide, back to fucking da da da. Then I was for a moment I had a little bit of contamination, so I couldn't touch surfaces. It was almost like wow, like this is fucking crazy. Like, am I ever gonna get out of this? But B, it was almost fascinating. Like my brain is like it was almost like this weird little universe that I experienced in my head. Like, this is crazy. Like, I can feel my brain trying to latch on to something to keep me like locked in somehow. And um and so it was all of that, like it started to I guess work for the sake of it. Like for the sake of explaining it, I went then I then I started doing group therapy after my one-on-ones because I felt like that was a good exposure to talk about it because even the fact that I'm talking to you about it, like it's such um a progress because there was times where I couldn't even like mention it. And I just was like I can't not talk about it. Like I'm a person where like what you see is what you get. I'm not a discreet person by any means. Like I'm very like open. So there's just one thing in my life that's like making me go back into the closet, so to speak. And it fucking killed me because I'm like, I want to talk about what's going on. And so thank God that I was able to do it um through the therapy, the proper therapy, that I got. And that's kind of like, I mean, that it was a and there's just so it's such a as you know it's such a dense thing like it's like you could it's so dense like that's just like kind of wrapping it up but I mean even 2020 when everyone was going crazy and like oh my God I've got to washing a mask I'm like you know what good like I'm sorry but I was like now you know what fucking people feel like living with this shit every day at least you know that it's gonna for the most part like be under control. But like there are people that wake up on a Tuesday morning having to wear a mask because they think they're going to die of it. You know what I mean? So it kind of hopefully it made it like, and I'm sure a lot of people that living with OCD during 2020 were just kind of sitting there with their hands folded, like, because I certainly was. I was like, oh yeah, now you guys are going to get a whiff of it. It doesn't feel good, does it? It's not just cleaning your desk, making sure the erasers are lined up. Mm-mm. Um, and even 2020 was a pretty gnarly year, but I did have the proper tools to kind of navigate it. And my OCD did creep up, during 2020, but not in a way of contamination and health. It was more like real event OCD, like real OCD does not just, it's interesting when I'm so used to dealing with these illogical like fears. Like one half of my brain is like, it's real. And the other half of me is like, it's not like it's this competition, right? But then when it starts seeping, like when it's real event shit, you're like, oh my God, like, how do I treat this?
Yeah.
Moral scrupulosity, being gay, hooking up, like, and then I'm, feeling shameful to the point where like, I was like, I don't want to go to the city that I hooked up in. I don't want to look at the city on a map, like engaging and avoid, like, it's just, and then that's when I had my aha moments, like, oh my God, this is how I've been my whole life. Like, I've been like this, like, anytime I would go on a bender and like just be a gay man on one night, and then the next day I would just be drowning in shame to the point where like I don't want to feel it again. So I would not go to that club for a while or not go to like
Mm.
all these things, you know. It was just gnarly to be like when I was experiencing those because my like I said, my brain was doing it does these things to try and keep me locked in. And so if I got the illogical shit like unlocked, then it was like, well, let me just start attacking like your day-to-day you know, like that's when I was like, okay, that this is an ongoing thing. This is not like I'm in the clear kind of thing. This is like a daily practice thing. I mean, I'll go for a run, and if I have my shirt off to get some sun and then there's kids playing on the playground, I will purposely go to the side where the kids are at and run. And then I'll be like, oh, why did I do that? Did I really want to do that? Or was that just because my therapy and this is, oh, but what if oh, well, I probably just wanted to do it and maybe I'm going to rape all these kids and that's just how it is. You know, so it's like, you know,
Yeah.
it's not a weird, I shouldn't say that. I hate that word, but it's just a refragmenting of my disc, and it's a
Mm.
daily thing that I have to do to try and keep the shit like manageable, you know? And that's my life, the
Absolutely.
end.
Yeah. Well, the end of that chapter. Um,
The end of that chapter for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, many more to be written. Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. And when you were a kid and you said after your mum had put all the clothes away, you'd then take them out and fold them how you needed them to be folded. That sort of need for control, does that still show up now in your life, do you think?
Yeah, it does. But in more healthier ways. I've really learned to like, it's incredible, like when you get the right therapy, how much it can trickle into your daily life. And so, like I said, I like not as much, but it still does. But I know now to just kind of like let it be
Mm.
most of the time. Yeah. Certain things, yeah. I mean, when I'm working, you know, when you're a designer, you have to like you can always make it look better. But comes a point where you're like, okay, pump it out. Let's move on to the next. You know? So you take it up to a point and then you're just like, you know what? I can beat this horse till it's fucking ground horse meat on the floor. Like, I'm out, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I like that. Um, and then with doing ERP, especially for pedophile themed OCD, did you have any resistance to doing it initially?
Actually, no. Because I was so like over feeling like that, I was willing to do anything. You could have told me to like paint myself blue and like sit in the middle of a forest by myself. I would have fucking done it. And so I was very like, oh, this is what I had to do? Okay, let's fucking do it. But I got to a point where I started to becoming obsessed with the obsession and the exposures that
Mm.
part of my exposure was not to do anything. So that was when I was like, oh no, I'm so used to like being really like punk about it. Like, let's do it. Let's fucking kill these, you know, exposures. And then I did. And then they're like, let's not, they're like, why don't do anything? And I'm like, but, you know, yeah.
Mm.
But you know, no, at first there was absolutely like, who wants to fucking sit like you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you're like, wow, this is where I'm at. Like, I wonder what a high school graduating class would think of me now, you know?
Mm.
Um, but after a while, I was like, what am I gonna do? You know, like this is what you have to do to get out of it is to go through it, you know? So
Mm.
I've been doing one thing the one way, might as well do it the other way and listen to the professionals, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, good. And how long do you think it took before you started seeing some results?
I would say I always like to say that my proper OCD recovery started when during the self-harm and POCD
Mm.
um duet. Um and I would say from that point on, I would say pretty immediate. Maybe like a month, maybe a
Okay.
month
Yeah.
of like, because the hard part is just if you're used to doing something a certain way, the therapy is so counterintuitive.
Mm.
So you like, why would I, like once you get over that, why would I, you know, why would I look up how to fucking tie a noose? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but once you get over that, then it's like it's a lot easier to like you're like, oh, I see what's going on, you know?
Mm. Yeah. Good
Yeah.
point.
They were running at the same time too. There was a time where I had to watch kids play on the beach on a YouTube, and on another window, watch how to tie a noose with a razor blade. And then this was like my exposure. And I was just like, after a while, like I was sitting there and enduring it, and I just was like, then I just started laughing. I'm like, this is fucking crazy. This fucking brain, I'm gonna kill it, you know?
Mm.
But when I was able to laugh at it at that moment, that's when I was like, okay, let's just we're in a good space, you know? But exposure therapy is not easy, you know? But you get to a point where you're like, oh my God, this is, like it's a lot to the
Yeah.
point where sometimes you just have to laugh at it. You have to like anyone that has POCD, like I think for me, the best way to get through it was just to laugh at it and to make a joke of it as much as possible, you know?
Yeah, you're right. Those thoughts can be so shaming and taboo. And I think it's hard for people initially to kind of laugh at it because I think they feel if I laugh at it, well, that makes me even more of a bad person. But I think, like you're saying, you start to see it as just thoughts. It really doesn't matter if it's pedophile contamination or it's just learning to laugh at your brain giving you these weird and wacky thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's true. And honestly, I know it's really hard for me to grasp this concept of like the thoughts don't mean shit. You hear it all the time, you
Yeah,
know, from the folks of you guys. Not you, but you know what I mean, like
yeah,
the people out there. And but I think theme switches for me, the theme switches helped me grasp it more. You
right.
know, if I stayed in POCD or self-harm, it'd be harder for me to grasp it. But
Mm,
I mean, hell, contamination, real event, moral scrupulosity, fucking pedophilia, what else? Even some BDD.
mm.
I couldn't look at mirrors for a week. Like it really helped me. Like, oh, it's all skimmed differently, but when you boil it down, it's the same. It's the same brute thing, you know. So it
Yeah,
helped.
really good point. Yeah. So words of hope for anyone listening, what would you say to them?
Um, I would say like just stick with it. We were talking about tattoos earlier, and it's like a tattoo. Like it's fucking gritty and it's a little painful at first. But when you endure it and you accept it for what it is, you're left with this really beautiful thing afterwards. And it's almost like a like a stripe in life. Like it's like you're look at that, like it's like a badge of honor, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. And then yeah, what would you tell if you pick up the phone, what would and call a younger version of you, what would you tell the say 10-year-old version of you?
I would tell the 10-year-old version, um, what would I tell the 10-year-old version of me? Um, you know, it'll get better. Um, just, what would I tell that 10-year-old? Honestly, I wouldn't tell them anything. I would just give them a hug and let them cry for a little bit, you know, and just let
Nice.
them know it's gonna be okay. That's all. I wouldn't, sometimes it's just words can, at that moment, when I was a 10-year-old, I didn't really trust words because words, people would always fall back on what their promises were. But actions would speak louder for me. So I would hang up the phone, find out where they're at, take them out for, you know, a McDonald's or something and give them a hug.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. And then you got a billboard in LA. What do you want written on that billboard?
I know you can't ask a graphic designer that question because it'll go through revisions. Honestly, I would want to do like a split screen of like when someone says like I'm so OCD, and then like on the other side of it is like what she would look like if she really was OCD. You know what I mean? Which is
Yeah,
essentially just the same person, but it just goes to show you don't really know someone's story, like just because they like to tidy up a certain situation does not mean that they're OCD, you know?
yeah,
That's
good
all.
point.
So something like that, like trying to help like reframe that like
Yeah,
that idea of like, OCD being like a what is an adjective?
work. Yeah. Yeah, that would be quite visually striking. And so lastly, is there anything else you wish you could have said or shared today?
No, I mean it's like I said, it's such a dense thing, and I just hope that I maybe help normalize someone's experience. A lot of times this shit doesn't exist on its own. Yeah, maybe I do have a little bit of PTSD, maybe I do have a little bit of generalized anxiety, but those things don't necessarily, I'm such more of a, you're more than just,
Hmm.
I think I'm more than just you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
we're such complex beings, we're more than just that. We're more than that. That's all.
yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. Well, look, thank you so much, Nicholas, for sharing your story and coming on.
Yeah,
I
thanks for
appreciate
letting
it.
me blab my mouth this whole time.
That was good. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us with a one-time tip/donation, please go to theocdstories.com/support. All tips, no matter how large or small, are greatly appreciated. Please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. And if you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.